Hello everyone, and welcome to today's InsideLocal webinar, and also Merry Christmas to you wherever you're listening in from. Very excited to be hosting today's webinar. We have three excellent and well-renowned local search experts with us who, for the festive season, will be sharing their greatest tips, advice, hints, tactics and knowledge with us just for free as part of their kind of festive goodwill. Our three panelists today are, if I get my control panel to work, we have Mary Bowling, Gyi Tsakalakis, and Dev Basu. I'll give them a quick introduction so you know exactly who it is that you will be listening to and whose wisdom you will be benefiting from today. Firstly, we have Mary. Now, Mary is the co-founder of specialist local digital agency Ignitor Digital. Mary's been working in the local search space for a very long time, and in fact, she has actually been training people in the arts of local search since as far back as 2006. She's a partner at Local U, which is an organization that provides advice and training in local online marketing to business owners and also to consultants. She's a regular speaker at industry conferences. She's a contributor to the local search ranking factor study, and quite how she finds the time to be with us today, I'm not sure, but we thank her very much for sparing an hour or so of her day. Next we have Gyi. Now, Gyi is the founder of AttorneySync, and they are a digital marketing service that specializes in helping legal practices with their online visibility and their online promotion. He's helped hundreds of attorneys and legal practices to kind of gain success through online marketing. More recently, he started a second agency that is EPL Marketing, where he essentially transfers all that knowledge and experience he's gathered helping legal practices and transfers that to other industries. He's also a contributor to the local search ranking factor study. He likes to keep himself busy, and we will certainly keep him busy today. We also have Dev Basu. Now, Dev is the president and CEO of Powered by Search. Powered by Search is a very successful Toronto-based digital marketing agency, and they are one of the most highly regarded agencies in Canada. Dev is also a contributor to the ranking factor study. He's been working in the industry since as far back as 2007, and when he is not steering his agency to greater success, he's actually now a professor at Seneca College, which I believe is in Toronto, or at least in Ontario, where he teaches applied arts and marketing to the next generation of SEO, search marketeers, or inbound marketeers, whatever label they'll be giving themselves when they can arrive in the industry. So he is stewarding the next generation through the murky waters of search marketing. So a big thank you to you three for sparing your time, your energy, and your expertise with us today. And as ever, a big thank you to everyone who has turned up today for the webinar, whether you're listening live or listening to recording. Thank you very much for being with us, and Merry Christmas. We have also people working behind the scenes, without which these webinars would not really get off the ground or be as useful as they are. We have Linda Bouquet from the Local Search Forum, and Linda and the Local Search Forum are the kind of co-organizers and the co-promoters of InsideLocal. So thank you, Linda, for all your help and support. We also have Conan Nielsen from ImpresioMarketing.com, who are a Toronto-based marketing agency. Both Linda and Conan will be looking after the kind of text Q&A. So you'll be sending through questions through the kind of question module. They'll be ones who will be answering your questions. They'll also be dishing out tips and advice and links through to various resources that they think are sort of very valuable and on topic. Also, that some of our panelists mentioned. And then last, and definitely least, there is me. I am Miles Anderson. I am the founder of BrightLocal. I'm also your host today. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great hour with us. These are the topics and questions that we'll be looking at today. Firstly, we're going to look at kind of common ranking issues and be discussing those. Then we'll be looking at the audit process for identifying and fixing kind of ranking issues. Then we're going to delve into the murky waters of duplicate listings. Then we're going to tackle penalties, both local penalties and organic penalties. And finally, look at some sort of final questions. And a big thank you to Linda for helping to kind of curate and organize today's topics and questions. A bit of admin stuff before we jump in and get properly started. In the question box, which hopefully most of you have found, is where you can pose your questions and where Linda and Conan will be answering and providing their assistance. Please also look out for links and comments in the chat box. Those two guys might be circulating particular kind of links through the chat box. If we have enough time at the end, any kind of key threads and questions that come through the Q&A will be raised up to the panelists, and Linda will be keeping an eye on that. And if you do fancy kind of tweeting anything about InsideLocal, please use the hashtag @InsideLocal when you do so. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on Friday. You'll be able to access it on both BrightLocal.com and also on the localsearchforum.com. We actually have our team Christmas party tomorrow, so we may be a little slow this week in getting the webinar available, but we will be planning to to get it over to you on Friday. We're actually going to be sending a follow-up email on Friday with links to the webinar recording and also a link to the slide deck that we used today. The slide deck is actually available right now on slideshare.net/BrightLocal, so you can go and access that immediately. But you'll have everything we kind of followed up with on Friday, all the kind of Q&A stuff that goes on will also be posted onto the local search forum. So hopefully that kind of relieves the pressure on you. Please do sit back, relax, get immersed in the debate that we're about to have, and I hope that you thoroughly enjoy it. To kind of keep you engaged, we are also running some polls during the webinar. These are 3 polls, and if you've been on these webinars before, you know the kind of premise behind these, that as well as getting our expert opinions, we also want to canvass the opinion of the 500, 1,000 people that we have in attendance today. It's a great opportunity for us to understand how you see these topics or how you see these issues and how they're affecting you on the ground. So please do take part. We will share the results of the polls with you at the end of the webinar. So that is the introduction over. Let's delve into why we're really here today. And let's go with our kind of first question, our first topic, which is about common ranking issues. And Mary, I'm going to throw this first question over to you. So Mary, you've been in the industry a long time. What are the most common problems that you see currently impacting people or businesses' ability to rank in local search?
Yeah, in the past couple of years, I've seen a lot of sites that are suffering from panda and penguin issues. It's not really unusual to find SMB sites that are suffering from both of those. And a lot of them come to me from either SEOs or business owners that simply haven't been able to keep up with all the algorithm changes in the past few years. They used to get local SEO, but they can't really seem to grasp all of the enormous changes that have taken place in the past 2 years. And in reality, there's so many things that are going on that it's hard for professionals like us to keep up with them. So you can see why it's a big problem for business owners. And a lot of what their problem is bad linking practices, low quality websites, thin content on their websites, and this whole idea of gaining links is something that hardly any of them are willing to change their ideas about. It's almost as if their minds have been poisoned by buying 500 links for $50 for so many years, that it takes a lot of education and convincing to get them to understand what's happening with this new world of trying to get good quality links to a good quality website.
That's interesting. How do you go about educating them and pressing upon them that they need to embrace this change rather than resist it? Do you find there's a moment of something you might say when a penny drops?
Usually what I try to do is to tell them, what would you do in your local community if the internet didn't exist? And if you do those things, you will naturally attract links that matter for your local business. You'll get referrals from it, and you will get good links from it that Google will reward you for.
So really, it's a general marketing bit of advice. It's about kind of extending, your reputation and relationship within your target market.
Yes, and I think that once a small business owner can understand that, what things would you be doing if the internet didn't exist to promote your business to the people that have the potential to become your customers, that seems to start making sense to them, that you should join the Chamber of Commerce, you should go to the business after hours, you should network and try to teach and share your knowledge in the community, and that it'll all come back to you.
That's a great start, Mary. Thank you very much. Deb, I'm going to throw the same question over to you. What are the kind of typical problems that you come across with your clients?
So we've seen a lot of the examples around penalties for sure. I think I'd say that in terms of local ranking, there's two sort of ways that I break it down. There's problems that impact organic rankings, and then there's problems that impact the 7-pack or map rankings, basically. The typical problem I see with the average SMB client is they don't keep up with the changing guidelines around the 7-pack rankings, basically. And that's kind of hard to keep up even with, being a local search professional at the end of the day, because Google does seem to go they don't have a set direction around what they believe is right. So what's kosher today may not be kosher 6 months from now. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that I have seen past decisions come back to haunt a lot of clients. So, for example, doing a lot of guest posting, for example, that they did back in 2010 is now showing up with Google has states where they start handing out more manual penalties in Google Webmaster Tools, for example, and then they haven't proactively gone in and disavowed those links. So a combination of poor websites, not cleaning up past mistakes that have happened around what used to work a couple of years ago, for example, and then not keeping up with things that are changing within Google My Business or Google Places specifically, in addition to the standard sort of common mistakes that I see around everything from not having the right citations, not having the right NAP, for example, stuff that's been discussed many times over on these webinars before. But those things are what pops into my mind at least.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So there's obviously, and Gyi, I'm going to lead to a kind of question for you here. Things change the whole time. It's confusing. It's difficult to stay on top of, particularly if you're a local business owner and you've got to do all those myriad of other things that you have to do to kind of keep your business kind of running, and marketing is just one of those, maybe even a simple part of those. Gyi, how does it, with your sort of specialism in the kind of legal sector, how are you seeing that sector kind of cope with these changes? And are they quite proactive, or is it really a case-by-case example?
So I thought I was going to be cute and say the biggest problem that's impacting local rankings right now is Google, but Dev kind of stole my thunder there. But I think that's a good point, because it's almost moving at such a rate now that nobody knows what the the right way to do things. I mean, you can do the general, like, of course, if you've been spamming links and if you're doing local type spamming with on-page stuff, you're going to start to run into those more well-known types of problems. But unfortunately, a lot of that spam has found its way back into local results, and so we get calls all the time from people that are saying, look what my competitor is doing. It seems to be working. Is that what you're recommending people to do? And of course we don't, because it's this moving, shifting earth type of thing. And so you're in it for the long haul. You've really got to focus on, I think some of the things Mary said were really astute, that think about what you would do for a local business if you weren't trying to market it online. Start there, and you're going to earn a lot of those authentic links. And of course, I think the focus on the local citations, getting the map consistent, that's kind of the second half of that. But in legal is rampant. I mean, a lot of the examples that Linda has shown recently in her forum, there's been a lot of legal spam. In fact, we just were joking, some actually that looked like had been resolved are actually passed. So, that to me is I'd like to see more leadership and consistency in the local space from Google.
Okay, that's a very interesting take. What are the sort of, when a new customer comes to you, what is the sort of typical thing they say to you? Is it a case of people were ranking and now they're not, or they've never ranked? What's the sort of typical complaint that a business, a local business has when they come to you? Gyi, again, if you could keep talking, please.
Sure. So recently it's been more of we used to rank and now we don't, and I think that is, kind of give Google a knock, but in some ways they have cleaned up a lot of things. The Penguin and Panda now, if Penguin actually really is running all the time, I think you're going to see a lot more churn and flux, and so that's why I think we're seeing a lot more. Hey, I used to rank and I don't rank anymore. But typically for the folks that have never ranked, in some ways they're actually at an advantage because they're not digging themselves out of a hole. So sometimes we actually prefer to have to deal with the newer businesses than the ones that have actually had bad habits that are tough to break and tough to convince them that those aren't, that's not really the way to move forward.
Yeah, and it can take a long time to clean up, kind of old links and old citations, particularly if they don't have access to them. Mary, when when you're looking at a new customer, how do you distinguish between a business that's just poorly optimized, one that's actually been hit by a penalty?
It's really hard to tell, because most of the time they will come to you and say, I used to rank. But then when you try to quiz them on it, some of them can produce some ranking reports to show you. but quite often they don't know exactly what they used to rank for. They don't know how long ago it was they were ranking or how long it went on. So the only way I can be absolutely certain that they have a penalty is if they've gotten a manual penalty in Webmaster Tools. Other than that, I can tell a lot by just looking at the site and looking at the backlink profile. It's pretty easy to spot somebody who's probably suffering from Panda issues and then also the Penguin issues. And anyone who's been doing this for a few years should be able to spot that sort of thing very quickly. And I also use the Penguin tool. That will look at your search traffic in Google Analytics and then overlay Moz's records of the updates, the algorithm updates that have happened. So sometimes that can help you pinpoint an exact moment when somebody lost half of their traffic. But it's not a foolproof tool by any means. So if you use all those things, look in Webmaster Tools, look at the website, look at the backlink profile, and run that Penguin tool across their Google traffic, you can usually get a pretty good idea of what their problems are and what they might be suffering from.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Deb, what are the kind of common misunderstandings that business owners have about ranking issues? When they come to you and say, I've got a problem, but actually it's just them misunderstanding the situation they're in.
Yeah, I see a lot of the time, again, breaking it into organic versus local. Maybe I'll start with organic first. They come up with all sorts of strategies. I have 11 domains, or all exact match, domains basically. I have a 2-page website on all of them, and I used to rank before. I don't understand why they're not ranking anymore. And it's the entire concept of talking about consolidation, of creating one sort of mothership, an authoritative website is something that they struggle with. So common misunderstandings, I think, are just around having confirmation bias around what used to work not working anymore, and having to break out of that sort of mental block, if you will, of understanding that Google really has changed. Because in the past, and even today for that matter, whenever Google does make an update to their local algorithm, as Gyi and Mary were saying, you get this spam kind of coming back and ranking like a champ basically in the index for at least a couple of months before it starts subsiding. And then, another couple of months later, there's another update and the spam comes back again. So that ebb and flow, I think, often gives business owners a false sense of confidence around their ability to trump Google or to best Google in terms of being smarter than it. So that's one. I've seen a lot of other ones related to, for example, things that used to be important but not as much anymore, especially post-Pigeon update. An example of that would be the centroid factor, so how close your business is to the center, the perceived city center of whatever metropolitan city or township that you're located in. There are some businesses that come to us where a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing almost, where they tend to know not only how they used to perform and crave that back, but they also have a partial understanding of ranking factors, not really doing any testing, and they try to essentially play around with their rankings. We've had clients in the past where we're essentially managing the process for them, and because they have their own logins and passwords to their My Business dashboard, they'll just go in and add a category, for example, or add a keyword into their business name just because they read somewhere that would help. So those are some of the sort of common misunderstandings of perceived better performance that I see that clients often have.
Okay, that's great. A very detailed answer. Thank you, Deb. I'm just going to go to the next slide. This is going to be our first poll. So please do take part in the polls. The more people that take part, the better. We're going to sort of follow up on that. The question for you guys is, what are the 2 most common ranking issues that you come across with your own clients? You should have the poll on the screen now. If you could please take part and vote, that would be great. Okay, great. I'm going to close that down now. We will feedback the answers to you at the end. Thank you to everyone who took part. So let's look a little more at the kind of ranking and auditing process now. So Mary, we'll sort of start with you. When you're starting a bit of work for a new client and they've got a ranking problem, do you have a kind of structured audit that you like to use each time?
I do a lot of one-off consulting and problem solving. And for those, they usually tell me they have a specific thing that they're struggling with, and I try to deal with that. But when I actually take on a client that I'm going to promote over the course of time, I like to start with a full audit of their website and their local search presence. Because you can't make a plan unless you know what you have to start with, what the problems are and what you need to do to fix them. And then I can sit down and prioritize what I think needs to be done and schedule it out over whatever time frame we need to meet in their budget. It certainly makes things easier for me and saves time for the client that I do have a reusable process. I have an audit template that I use. Not that I don't deviate from that at some times, but it certainly does help that I have a process that I use every single time to do this website and local presence audit.
And do you have a kind of a document, a Google Doc or an Excel doc, or do you have something a bit more sort of sophisticated that walks you through the steps, and also something that you can pass on to a colleague or a junior colleague so they can kind of learn the steps?
No, because we don't work that way. My partner and I in Ignitor, we're kind of a little boutique agency, and what we're selling are ourselves, our experience, and our expertise. So that kind of is what differentiates us from a lot of different big agencies. There are no junior people doing anything.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to put it to Dev then, because Dev, you run a very successful agency powered by search, and I don't know how many you've got, but I know that you obviously can't be involved in everything hands-on every day. How would you, what kind of sort of structured process do you have, and how important is that in your business?
It's very important. So having a workflow is part and parcel for every process that we actually have. And we not only have things like Google Docs and Excel files, of course, but we also have a structured intake process to ask the client the right kinds of questions when they're onboarding. And then we have things like duplicatable task lists, for example, milestones for a project that we usually start quarterbacking in some sort of project management software that we use. So think like Basecamp, basically. And that allows us to be able to task out the right sorts of tasks to different team members, essentially, and they all handle different parts of the process. So typically when we're even thinking about doing the structured audit, asking the right questions and getting that data is an important part. And it's different for different types of businesses. So if you're a small business, for example, we'll go to a certain level, but if you're an enterprise business and you have hundreds of locations, for example, then it starts getting a little bit more complex at that level, and we need to ask you more questions and get context around the aggregators you might have been using, whether you use Yext, for example, or not. What is the process being like? How many other agencies have you typically worked with? What did they do? So really getting the backstory first helps before we start, again, like Mary said, you don't know what to fix until you know what's broken and what the methodology or process had been in the past. And that's, for us, it's very typical to get businesses that it's not their first rodeo when it comes to search. They've already worked with other consultants or agencies, and for whatever reason, things didn't pan out the way that they expected it to. So they find us afterwards, and then they say, hey, so I've kind of been through this process. Can you help me? And having that structure and the processes that we can template out and essentially have other team members work on really helps, because it covers about 8 out of 10 cases, and then the other 20% are edge cases that typically our partners get involved in.
Okay, that's great, Deb. Gyi, question for you. What's the first step you take in an audit? What's the very first thing you look at and do, and why?
Well, I would back up because, like the other panelists indicated, I'd like to get people talking. What have you done? Who have you been working with? From there, we usually go into the two major parts at the beginning of the audit after we've got a nice narrative of what's been going on, our assessment of the site or sites, And then, using a variety of tools to use, which starting to get a sense of what kind of citation issues they might have. But primarily we're looking on-site, crawling sites, we're doing backlink analysis, looking at using something to check citations, and that really starts to paint the picture of what kind of problems they might be facing, and that's really going to start to shape the direction, because it can be a totally different direction depending on the nature and the scope of the issues they might be facing, how much work they've had done, whether they recently moved offices, changed phone numbers, that kind of thing, if there's a manual penalty. So I guess I would break it into 3 buckets. For us, it would be on-site issues, checking links, and then checking citations.
Okay, great. And what is, when you talked about, and the final question here is about client involvement. So you think it's almost the kind of starting place is to kind of get the client involved, get information from them. I mean, have you got any kind of examples of where the client's told you kind of one thing, but actually when you sort of delving into it, you discovered another, and that's really elongated the experience in terms of the audit?
Sure. So a lot of times we really haven't done anything, and then we look and they've had excessive link building done. And so sometimes it's because they worked with an SEO that didn't really inform them, and so they really didn't know what was going on. For them, they saw their website, maybe they had some kind of top-level report that they were receiving, but they didn't really see the specifics in terms of link building, and so that there's oftentimes a miscommunication, misunderstanding of the client that, hey, we'll say, once we get actually, sometimes they don't even have Webmaster Tools hooked up, so we verify Webmaster Tools and find out, oh, you actually do have a manual penalty, or we'll have access to analytics and we'll see that, correlating with a recent update, the traffic's fallen off a cliff, and so it might be news to them. In many instances, the only reason they would even know that they even had an issue was because maybe the phone stopped ringing, or they stopped getting emails through their website, or whatever their whatever kind of conversion events they could feel. And so oftentimes there's a long discussion that has to go on about, hey, here's what actually has been going on. Giving them the picture that we see through our lens is much different than the picture that they often see, and so that can elongate the process. So again, it's back to that. The less you've had done typically, the less of that kind of untangling you have to do. But otherwise, that's why it's really important, and you can actually exacerbate problems if you don't really understand the nature of what's been done in the first place. So we spend a lot of time with that.
That's interesting. I guess it's a case of, you don't always assume the client knows exactly what's going on, and I guess kind of depth of questioning will help you kind of unearth issues that they may not even know about, or may not kind of consciously know about. Mary, last question for you. How long do you typically take over an audit, and how might that vary depending on the nature of the kind of client you're working with?
Because we're so small, it usually takes us about 2 weeks to get something on our schedule, get to it, and get it done. The actual time involved is probably between 6 and 12 hours for a typical small business client. When you start adding locations, it adds time to that process. Does that answer your question?
It certainly does. And Dev, given that I know you've got some sort of individual independent SMB clients as well as some enterprise clients. When you're looking at an enterprise client, how much does that kind of blow out the kind of audit time period if they've got say 200 plus locations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a large part of it is just being able to get enterprise clients to give us the information that we need as part of the intake. Just being able to connect us with there are folks that they work with, of aggregators. Even getting logins can sometimes take a long time because there's provisioning and IT and other legal things that you need to consider. So by the time when we actually get that data, and our process for enterprise is a little bit different than it is for SMBs. We had to go look at data from multiple sources, cleanse it, scrub it, run it through analysis tools to be able to understand whether or not there's duplicates out there, not just existing active duplicates, but also, like, for example, phone numbers that used to exist before, do they still exist, for example, today? Addresses, whether the companies have merged or not, that's a consideration as well to look at. But typically, enterprise is quite a bit longer than the typical SMB. I think the average project for something like that ranges between 60 and 90 days end to end.
Wow, so 60 90 days is just the kind of data gathering and initial assessment part. I guess there must be so much data to manage there. And again, process and consistency in that process must be crucial.
Yeah, and then getting snapshots and things like that are pretty crucial as well. So, enterprise clients typically want to get a snapshot of their before and after performance so that they can demonstrate that there was a business case for their local search investment. So that means a lot of data snapshotting needs to occur as well, which means how many, if you have, for example, an aggregator, how many listings are active, how many are pending, how many are broken, for example. What is your average review rating? How many reviews do you have? How many citation sites are you syndicated out to? You have to basically not only capture all that data, but then you need to standardize it in a way which you can compare it to later and say, well, because we now have a review generation strategy, in the last 2 quarters we've been able to get 25% more reviews, and that has impacted our ranking by X, which resulted, traffic by Y, for example. So it's a big correlation game that you need to do, and if you don't have that snapshot beforehand, you don't really know what to compare to.
That's great. Thank you guys for your questions. So let's jump into the thorny issue of duplicate listings. I expect we're going to spend a fair amount of time on this. Mary, I'm going to come to you first. Can you just explain what duplicate Google Plus listings are and why they're such a problem?
Well, it's having more than one listing for a location, barring the practice practitioner thing, which is a whole nother issue. But, they're a problem mainly because they're against Google's guidelines to have a duplicate listing. But Google creates so many listings on their own that it's hard for me to fathom how they can possibly punish anybody else for having duplicate listings. When they put people over onto the new dashboard, it wasn't unusual for new listings to pop up, new duplicate listings to pop up in their accounts that were not even verified. They're also a problem because they split up reviews. If there's more than one listing out there, people could be finding either one of the listings, split the reviews up, and you're not getting those concentrated all in one listing where they can help you rank better and to gain more customers. And the other issue with them is that searchers might see one that has old or bad information on it. Get in their car and drive to an old address, pick up the phone, dial a bad phone number, and you've lost them because they think, oh, that business is gone. That business is out of business, so I'm not going to even bother trying to communicate with them or find anything out about them anymore. So that's why they're a problem, and they're hard to find these days on Google. And Google, when you talk to support about it, they almost act like it's not a big deal. I've heard them say things like, well, if it's not a verified listing, it's not going to show up in the search results. But meanwhile, they have this guideline saying that you shouldn't have duplicate listings. So it's a big problem for all of us, I think.
Do you find that issue with support is one of lack of understanding, or are they just trying to hide the fact this issue is such an issue?
I don't think they're trying to hide anything. I think the people we talk to at Google Callback Support probably have limited knowledge. They certainly are not trained in anything that has anything to do with rankings. They're just charged with trying to get what they perceive to be the correct information about businesses on the internet. And their helpfulness seems to ebb and flow. It seems like sometimes you're talking to somebody who's very knowledgeable and can jump right in and help you out, and sometimes you call and you get somebody who has to put you on hold for every question you ask to go find an answer out from somebody else and get back to you.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Gyi, I'm going to come to you, and we are going to talk about sort of practitioner listings a little bit. So I don't want to get sort of too much into that particular topic, and obviously with your experience of kind of working with kind of legal businesses, there's lots of kind of practitioner issues that come into play. Typically, when you're looking at a new customer, how often do you find they've got duplicate listings, and how much impact do you think that is having on the problems? I mean, how much of a typical problem is it?
We run into it a lot, and I think it's a big problem. So one of the things that we found is that even just duplicate suppression itself. So if you've got a client who has a lot of already citation work done, and then you just suppress duplicates, that in and of itself, without even link building or anything else, can have a huge impact. So I think it's really a big thing to address and to really take inventory of the entire duplicate issue from the start. Because what often we find ends up happening is if you don't identify the full picture of the problem, especially as it relates to dupes at the beginning, you end up doing a lot of other things and then throwing your hands up and saying, I don't understand why this isn't working. It's kind of like one of the, for at least in our experience, it can be it's a really strong signal the wrong way. So I think duplicates are really important. And especially if you've folks that have had work with different agencies with different accounts, or they claim their own, or they're not in communication with the folks they're working with. Yeah, they're contributing to their own duplication problem oftentimes, and we see it a lot.
And how effective have you found using the Google support when you've got a really thorny issue where there's duplication, multiple dupes rather, in different accounts with kind of split kind of ownership or control? How useful have you found using the kind of Google support as a route to solving this?
So not very helpful, but way more helpful than it used to be.
That's something at least, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they tend to be one of your sort of first ports of call when you're looking at correcting these things?
Typically, no. Usually we tap the community. If we get something that's like really sticky, we'll go to other community expert resources. Again, a lot of this we can look at through some of the tools and some of the partners partner tools that we use to actually identify. But a lot of times too, it becomes pretty obvious if you just need to know kind of what to look for. And on the face, if you're not talking about hidden duplicates, you can usually see those right from search results just by searching for business name, phone number, addresses, things like that. They'll show up in the results, and so from a very simplistic level, they're pretty easy to spot at first. The hidden ones and the ones that have been automatically generated, those can be a little bit more tricky. But yeah, it's rare that we go to to Google actually for local help. And I don't know, maybe if other people have had other experiences. We don't really have we don't have a lot of visibility and a very strong name, so I think that Google lacks the incentive or the will to provide a very robust support platform. But in deference to them, they have been better in local, in my opinion.
Okay, that's great. You mentioned some tools there that you use. Can you share a couple of those or the processes that you use for identifying dupes?
Sure. So like I said, one is just like the manual searching, but beyond that, we really like Yext. We really like we use InsideLocal. We use Yext. Actually, you got to kind of talk to them about what their process is for duplicate suppression. Whitespark, Darren Shaw's got a good tool for looking at duplicates and citations in general. So those are some of the major ones, but a lot of it, unfortunately, too, is just grunt work. It's just a lot of looking and searching in various combinations to try to find them. But it also helps to have that narrative of, hey, we've got, especially when it comes to Google, 3 different people started 3 different My Business or Google Local accounts and created these listings. So that's, again, I think that the narrative is the real starting point, and that will kind of guide your search in terms of what tools and what process might make the most sense for the client.
Okay, that's great. Remind me afterwards to give you a trial to BrightLocal. Dev, what are the sort of steps that you do when you're kind of locating kind of duplicate listings, and particularly going to focus on hidden dupes? Maybe you could describe what a hidden dupe is, why they're so problematic.
So a hidden dupe, as the name kind of implies, is one that is a lot harder to spot because it exists and it does mess up the local search ecosystem in terms of your NAP data. And it can basically be a little bit like a succubus in some ways. It can harm you without you knowing it unless you know where to look for it. And they can originate because of a lot of auto-generated listings or listings that used to be alive before that are now suppressed. My favorite way of being able to spot them is through Google MapMaker, specifically looking at like the history of the record. When you go into MapMaker, a lot of what Gyi was saying, which was around business name, phone number type searches or address type searches, for example, when you start doing those in MapMaker, you can find all the records that surface basically, and at that point in time, you can look at that and go, is it still alive? Well, who edited it? What was the history basically around this? And that's a good way of being able to fix duplicates that way. One of the things that we do is we actually proactively just make MapMaker edits to build up history around that. So whether it's pulling in some community support or just having more of our team basically kind of weigh in on MapMaker edits, what we've noticed is that if you have enough sort of clout around that thing, you can typically make your edits pop quicker than usual, at least. And once you build up a certain level of trust. It's very common, though, if you've never used MapMaker before, don't get discouraged. It's a little bit like Wikipedia. Almost every time you make an edit, it's going to come back being declined in the beginning, at least, until you build up some history around it. But that's my favorite way of being able to solve duplicate listings.
So as an SEO then, you'd like it to come across as a lot, then kind of persisting with going to get that kind of MapMaker accreditation is a good long-term plan for you.
Yeah, and in general, even before MapMaker was, it existed, we would just go in with the right group, like our Google profiles, and just, leave reviews on all the establishments that, our staff frequented. So whether it's like a pizza place or a restaurant or whatever else it might be, I think it's kind of practice of eating your own dog food as well, because we all know that, it's very hard to get clients' reviews. And it's probably one of the things clients complain about too, that getting more reviews is a hard thing to do. Soliciting them is a hard thing to do, and soliciting them even on certain channels is not even allowed, really. So it's kind of a good practice just to get in the habit of leaving reviews. And I think as a local SEO practitioner, the more you approach it the same way a consumer would, you get a deeper or better understanding of it from the consumer point of view, which allows you to be a better marketer at the end of the day.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Dev. Gyi, talking about kind of practitioner listings, with your experience in the kind of legal sector, how does that add additional complications to kind of Google Plus management and the kind of update to the guidelines and also duplicates? Can you kind of talk us through your experiences in the legal sector?
Sure. So there are a couple of issues that we see with lawyers all the time. One is they want to create a local profile for every practice area. So if they are a personal injury lawyer and a criminal defense lawyer and a bankruptcy lawyer, they think that they should develop these local profiles for each one of those, and that's a clear violation of the guidelines. So don't do that. Start with the guidelines, and even though they have been changing a bit recently, as far as I understand them, and you can correct me if I'm not up to date, but one listing for every physical office location, one listing for every practitioner. So if you're a personal injury lawyer and criminal defense lawyer and bankruptcy lawyer, and you have one office location, you basically, that equals two. You get one for your office location, you get one for you. Now there might be some situations where you might not even want to do the practitioner listing or vice versa, depending on a kind of dilution. So sometimes we've seen instances where if you've got 17 lawyers, you might think, oh well, if I got 17 lawyers in one office, I can get 17 opportunities. But we've not every time, but sometimes we've seen that actually work against the firm because it kind of dilutes their local presence. So it kind of depends on the resources you have allocated to it. Typically, I think that as long as you follow the guideline, I think that's probably the best place to start. But it kind of depends on where you are, but certainly don't create local pages for every different practice area that you have.
Okay, that's great. Last final word on kind of duplicate listings. Mary, is there anything you'd like to add to the debate?
With the practice practitioner listing, I have the same experience Gyi has, that lawyers, especially certain types of lawyers, tend to be very aggressive. They want to dominate everything, and they think that the more listings they have, the better. But in most cases, all it does is confuse things. And it's not really unusual to have a big established law firm that's been around for 50 years, has 50 lawyers, and some new young upstart comes in who's very active on social, who kind of understands the internet and is more active on the internet, to start out ranking the practice even for its own name. And you can imagine what kind of problems that causes internally and for the SEO, because the guy who started this company 50 years ago, lawyer.
No, we're getting some audio issues, I think. Mary, unfortunately still not good. I tell you what we're going to do is we're going to go to the next poll, and hopefully that will give your connection a bit of a rest, and we'll kind of come back to it. So apologies for that. Let's jump to the next poll, everyone. So you should have the poll kind of on the screen now. This one we're asking, what percentage of your customers you found or had duplicate kind of Google Plus listings with? I'm keen to see how widespread this is. Please just select one answer. So everyone's voting now. Okay, just going to close that down now and go on to the next section. So now we're going to look at sort of penalties. And Deb, let's come to you first. How can you tell if in a business got a penalty, whether it's a local penalty or an organic penalty? What are the kind of signals you look for?
So let's start with the easy one, which is the organic one. So your telltale signs are a loss of traffic and visibility. So you might start off with like getting less phone calls, less form submissions. Your analytics would have tanked, which, by the way, I would suggest that people set up Google Analytics intelligence alerts so that if your traffic day over day, for example, tanks by, let's say, 50%, for example, you get an email alert, so you're not just finding that by chance. But other than that, going into Google Webmaster Tools, you'll see if there's a manual action over there. That indicates a penguin penalty. If you have a panda penalty, you will not get any such indication. So likely you'll just start seeing that your traffic is dropping at a pretty steady pace month over month. At that point, what you want to do is look at a landing page report by organic as basically a source or a medium, and understand which landing pages got affected, and that could tell you that you have a thin content issue. Other than that, using the Penguin tool, like Mary was mentioning from Barracuda, I believe, is a good way of understanding whether or not you had traffic changes right around the time Google launched an update of some kind. And then on the local end, it's a little bit more nebulous to figure out whether you have a penalty or not. One way that you can have a look at this is, obviously, if you go into your My Business dashboard and you have locations that have an issue or a big red bar that says that something needs to get fixed over there, that's one of the indications you can get. But for a true local penalty, if you understand whether that's impacting your ranking or not, what you might want to do is start searching for the telltale signs of your business, things like your phone number or your business name, for example, in Google Universal Search. And if it doesn't pop up in Universal Search for that type of non-competitive query, but it does pop up in the maps.google.com results, that might indicate that there is a local penalty at that point of time. So that's at least what I'm aware of.
Okay, that's great. Gyi, any other sort of techniques you've got, or great ways for sort of sniffing out what the issue might be?
No, I think Deb hit it pretty well there. If you've identified most of the other factors, so if you've got consistent NAP and you've got you've got clean links, or it's a new business, and nothing's really visible, you kind of got to work through that searching and seeing if what the anomalies are. That kind of tells you the next step. But beyond that, if there's not, on the local side of things, there's not a very clear indicator of whether or not you've got a penalty. So you've got to just kind of work through your audit, work through your checklist. Once you've done everything that you possibly can to clean up citations and make sure that links look good, then if you're still seeing, if you're seeing organic rankings but you're not seeing local, that's when you start to say, hey, maybe I've got a more significant problem here, a penalty.
Which of a penalty is harder to resolve there, Gyi, in terms of local and organic? Which ones do you kind of sort of dread kind of coming across, or do you find that actually that's an opportunity for you?
Well, I dread them all in different ways. So when you're talking about manual penalties, The nice part about a manual penalty is you know you have a manual penalty, and depending on the type of penalty, there are pretty well agreed upon courses of action. I dread them. I dread those because there's still a lot of work involved, especially going through the link removal, disavow, reconsideration kind of cycles. That's a really frustrating thing. And by the way, Dev has an awesome post on Powered by Search on going through that kind of process. I recommend. Algorithmic penalties, on the other hand, the challenge is first identifying whether you have the algorithmic penalty, and you're really left to things like correlating traffic changes with updates. So it's not as clear cut, especially when you're working with sites that are lower traffic in general, because you got to make sure that this is not just some kind of natural fluctuation that's going on with your traffic. It really needs to be like a dramatic, oh my gosh, like you dropped off a cliff and haven't recovered type of thing. Once you've identified that, though, resolving the algorithmic penalty can often be even more discouraging because you don't have any direction. You have no place to go submit reconsideration or to get additional feedback, and so you're kind of shooting in the dark with those. And local, those can be some of the worst because you're really in the dark. And so, I dread all the penalties, but I guess if I had to prioritize them, I would say the manual, while they're very difficult to work through, you at least feel like you're moving in a direction.
That's a great, really thorough answer. Thank you to that. Mary, how is your sound now? Can you
hear me now?
We can do. That sounds great. Excellent. Mary, very quick question. We're going to go on to the local penalties in a second. Are there engines besides Google have the same kind of penalty punishments? Do Bing and Yahoo also have those?
I don't really know. And to tell you the truth, I don't really pay that much attention. To me, Yahoo's local results have become so bad, I can't believe anybody's paying any attention to them. I do have a few clients that Bing can be important to, but I haven't experienced any penalty issues.
Okay, great. Let's not delve too deep into that. Let's go to the next bit, looking more at kind of local penalties. So staying with you, kind of Mary, what are the most common Google My Business guideline violations that you come across?
I would say that the ones I most commonly come across are people who are using virtual locations and trying to make Google think that they are real business locations. That's something that I'm sure Gyi has experienced a lot of, since it's just rampant in the legal industry. For a while there, it seemed like Google was really going after these folks with virtual offices, and then they backed off and everybody jumped back on the bandwagon. But now these new guidelines are specifically talking about virtual offices again, and even mention Regis virtual offices by name. So I, kind of have this nagging little feeling in the back of my head that maybe they're getting ready to go after them again. But to me, that's the most typical violation, is people using employees' homes for business locations, using virtual offices, still using mailboxes, etc. type locations.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Dev, kind of beyond that, what are the other sort of guideline violations that you typically come across? And when you look at the enterprise sector, do you find different violations for enterprise customers as opposed to its independent businesses?
What I find is often for enterprise customers, there's not a single point of truth with their data. So they actually end up submitting different data to different aggregators, for example. Sometimes they're not aware of the number of people within the organization that are actually contributing to a My Business account, basically. It's a bit better today with the way it was, or is rather, but the way it used to be with Google Places, where essentially whoever claimed a listing last had ownership. There would definitely be problems around that. In general, on a listing by listing basis, I see issues with incorrect categories, keyword insertion, for example, in the business name and at the category level, some clever keyword insertion within the descriptions, for example. Just trying to essentially tick all the boxes possible in terms of keyword insertion wherever possible on their profile. And most of those are violations. Things like the virtual mailbox type of client used to be a problem for us a couple of years ago. We just don't take on any more of those types of clients anymore. So if they have a service area, for example, and they want to go through it that way, we'll just say that the mailbox is not a long-term strategy, and it doesn't matter if we set it up for you right now. You're just going to get mad at us later on when it stops working. Clients are, sometimes they do end up forgetting why something stopped working, even if they were advised of the risks moving sort of into it. So those are some of the top level issues that I see with GMB violations.
Gyi, because of you, when you come across sort of guideline violations, and how quickly do you kind of act upon them, and what sort of steps do you take to rectify them?
So assuming we've already kind of gone through the process of auditing and understanding what the problem is, that's like our next biggest, most priority item, is to try to start getting local in shape. Especially if you're a local business that relies on local search, and for your target keywords, they're still showing, Google's still showing local pack results. I'd make that like the biggest part of your the start of what you're doing. It's hard to make these broad brush statements, but the local stuff tends to be tedious. It tends to take a long time to get everything right, and so if you don't start that on day one, and you're doing all sorts of other great things, but you don't get local right, and you rely on local, it's going to delay the effectiveness. So right off the bat, you're talking about getting your citations in order, making sure they're consistent. If you've been doing things like the blatant local violations, like if you're doing a bunch of keyword stuffing and you're creating duplicates, or if you're doing something like using a directory link in your web the web field for your local profile, those types of things we get after right away, and local's a top priority right from the beginning. So anybody that's dealing with local in general, I think that once you've done the audit, those should be near the top of your priority list, or else you spend a lot of time doing stuff that isn't going to move the dial the way you want.
Okay, great. Mary, question for you. Once you've identified kind of guideline sort of violations and you've gone to rectify them, how long does it typically take for you to see local rankings either come back or make a significant climb?
Was this question for me? I'm sorry, Miles.
It was, yeah, sorry, it was for you, Mary, yes.
Well, it really depends on what they've done. Sometimes you can make a small change, like let's say their map pin is a little bit off, and you correct that and put it in the exact right place. That can make rankings jump almost instantly. But for some other things, it can take 6 months. I mean, that's working pretty hard at it. If you have a small budget, you don't have very many resources, then they pretty much need to be willing to put in some elbow grease to try to help themselves out some, especially with citations, citation cleanup. I do think that there probably are some accounts that get poisoned because there's so many violations associated with them. So that's one of the things that I personally try to avoid with businesses, is not letting some of the things they do that are bad poison the things that they're doing that are correct. But time-wise, I think 2 to 6 months is probably the best time frame I could give people, and I usually tend to tell them 6 months to buy myself a little bit of leeway there.
Okay, that's great. So can you tell me more about, you mentioned then about some poisoned listings. Can you just explain a little bit more about that? I've never heard that sort of phrase before.
I think that Google is probably keeping, I know that Google knows that I'm an SEO, I talk to them enough on the telephone. I log into enough different accounts. I'm the manager of enough different accounts that Google knows I'm not the typical small business owner. And I think they probably hold me and people like me to a little bit higher standards than just, you know, the guy with the dry cleaning store down the street who doesn't know what he's doing, so he makes a lot of mistakes. So I think that we not only do we need to be ethical in what we're doing, but we need to kind of encourage our clients to be ethical in what they're doing too, so that they're not going to suffer in the long run by getting caught doing too many tricky things.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you for that, guys. We're kind of slightly running over time a little bit. I'm just going to go to third and final poll, the North Pole. You can get the kind of festive element in there. So we're going to start this now. This one is, what percentage of your customers have suffered a local penalty? Really keen to find out how widespread this issue is. And we'll share the results with you in a second. I'm just going to, we don't have enough time to discuss the kind of organic penalties. One way is the final questions. I think is where we get the real sort of juicy bit. So I'm going to come to you first, Gyi. What do you consider to be your hidden gem idea in terms of getting someone to rank? You know, it's mainly underused or not known by many SEOs. What do you think is your ace up your sleeve?
So let's assume we're not going to talk about spam. And really, there is not as much of a secret or a gem, but it does really work. And I think it goes along the lines of some of the things that Mary was saying early on. But focus on publishing and putting out really hyper-local content. I think that we tend to think that we need to set the world on fire, and so we're like, oh, we got to get links from all over the place, we got to get visibility from all over the place. But if you're a local business, think about content on a super local level. Think about things like street names and counties and states. Think about the types of terms that smaller local communities use, because even the way that even the language can vary on a really local level. And so local content that speaks to local issues, that is publicized in a very local community, getting those links. To me, post-pigeon, we're really talking about links. You've got to get the table stakes stuff right, but focus on those hyper-local links. I think that's going to drive the best results.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Gyi. And so in terms of hyperlocal content, are you talking about publishing on your own site, or publishing on your own site but also publishing out to other sort of local blogs, for example?
So I'm scared to say publish to local blogs. I don't want that to be misconstrued, but I'm really talking primarily on your own site, so getting your pages to rank locally. That's not to say that you shouldn't be contributing. You certainly should, especially one of the things we like to do is to see what kind of sites actually are already, the kind of the Will Scott Barnacle SEO idea. See what kind of sites are already ranking for those local terms, and then see if there's opportunities for visibility there and publishing there. But what I'm really focused on is what kind of things can we put on our site. One that's kind of becoming abused a little bit, but it's a very popular one, is in the legal space, is doing dangerous intersection types of content. So you've got tools that show where there's a dangerous intersection, or you're using public databases to populate graphs of some kind of accident or injury reporting stuff, but on a very, very local level, because people are always surprised that people actually perform searches with zip codes, street names, city names, and so don't create spam content to try to capture all those. But if you can create content that's actually localized, that people would actually be like, oh wow, that's really useful, and link to it, you'd be surprised at the traction that you can get from that.
That is a great tip, thank you. Deb, what is your hidden gem that you think really moves the needle for ranking?
I'll share two. So the first one is being able to think about links as context as a new PR, essentially. So ditch your page authority, domain authority, PR metrics, and look for context, and look for your 6 degrees of separation from your local business, basically. So think about your community, your neighborhood, then think about your city, then think about all the other business owners that are in there, for example, and start polling and interviewing them. So whether it's crowdsourced content that you're publishing on your site, for example, around events, particular festivals, around Little League games, for example, whatever that might look like. And you can get even polls or interviews running of other business owners or the community on your site. You can then get other local businesses to link to you as a result, establishing context around your locality. So that's a crowdsourced interview type of technique, basically. And the second thing is click metrics. So Post and Pigeon, Google's not only looking at your overall authority based on the factors that local SEO is typically optimized for, but it's also looking at whether or not people believe, the users actually believe your location is a popular one. So we've been running some tests and studies specifically around whether if we have crowdsourced clicking happening on listings, for example, map rankings basically, we've noticed that if you do it at a slow enough pace but at a high enough volume, rankings tend to jump basically within the pack. So that kind of showcases that Google is looking at click-through rate factors, for example, around an overall pack of listings. So if you have a unicorn-style click-through rate on your listing versus your competitors don't really have that, then you might be rewarded with a better ranking, basically. So that would be one of the hidden gems that I don't see a lot of people talking about.
Okay, that's great. And Mary, same question to you.
My hidden gem involves links too. I think that with Penguin, so many people have been scared of building links that they're really neglecting that right now. And as I said earlier, I think that getting good links is easier for a small local business many times than it is for anyone else, because there's a very defined area that they're looking to rank in, so they're very defined places where they can go to look for links. And I think that people, they've kind of thrown out low quality directories because Google throws them out. But I think on a local and hyper-local basis, you shouldn't be worried about the quality of the website. I wouldn't worry about domain authority or page authority, because they're still conveying that location prominence if you can get links from these hyper-local and local low quality, what we would generally consider as SEOs as low quality sites. So I think it's links, especially with Pigeon being so influenced by organic and links not counting in local very much for so long. There was such a long time there where all you had to do was be able to rank well in maps to really rank well in that local pack, that a lot of local people don't understand that they really need to be trying to build good local links now.
Okay, that's great. So thank you, guys, for your answers to that. Just going to jump to show everyone the results of the polls. First one up is, what are the two most common ranking issues you come across? Citation and app inconsistency is right up there with 41%, followed by duplicate Google Places listings, and then kind of poor on-site optimization. Interestingly, kind of poor backlink profile, comes down, kind of fairly low down the order. Second question was, what percentage of your customers have had duplicate Google Plus listings? You can see a big spread there, but looking like, somewhere between 20 and 60% being the kind of mean there. So a really significant number of local businesses having duplicate listings and being affected by duplicate listings. And the final poll was, what percentage of your customers have suffered a local penalty? So actually very few. So very few have actually had a local penalty. Maybe they haven't diagnosed a local penalty. But go back to the previous slide to see a lot more have had kind of duplicate issues, but not so many have actually been slammed by an actual kind of penalty there. So these results will be added to the slide deck slideshow. So if you need to kind of access them afterwards or want to use them, please do. It might give you some nice ammunition for kind of pitching to kind of local business owners. So a big thank you to our new panelists. Guys, you were great. I've learned a lot. I've really enjoyed speaking to you and learning from your wisdom. So thank you very much for sharing an hour and a half or so of your time with us today. Any kind of parting comments you want to give our attendees? Even a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, and to better marketing in 2015.
Indeed, onwards and upwards for all of us, I hope. Thank you to Linda and Colin for working tirelessly behind the scenes. I look forward to reading the Q&A. Linda, if you want to grab the Q&A now, and I think then we'll publish it up to the local search forum where you can kind of read that and digest some of the answers and the questions that kind of came through. That would be great. We've got some more, we've got a break now between the next webinar, which starts, again, the series starts again in January. On January the 14th, we're looking at the state of local search in 2015. We've got Mike Blumenthal, Mike Ramsey, and Adam Dorfman joining us on that. And then we've got Mary back and Gyi back again on the 28th of January. And then we've got another one in February. So InsideLocal is rolling on into 2015. So please join us after Christmas on January the 14th for the state of local search. And you can sign up for it here. I'll ask Linda to send the link out if you want to kind of get their kind of place reserved now. That would be great. And have a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year to you all. So panelists, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Linda and Colin, you were great as always. And everyone who's hung on to the end of the webinar, thank you. And of course, have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll hopefully see you next year. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.